here anyway. So I've put on here on the screen who I am and what I do, and those are the things I'm going to talk about, what I do, and I guess to an extent who I am. So as it says here, I'm the director of ears, and you'll find out what ears is, and I'm the curator of sound waves, and you'll find out what sound waves is, and I teach the horn, and well, I'm the horn professor here in the School of Music, and you'll see what that's all about as well. So my English teacher in college told me to always state the obvious, so that's what a horn is. Also known as the French horn, and I'm really bad at PowerPoint, so I couldn't figure out how to get the whole horn into that picture, but that's most of it. And that actually, I did take the trouble to find online a picture of the actual model of horn that I play, so that is in fact the model of horn, of one of my horns anyway. And I came to UW in 2011 in the fall semester to be the horn professor here. So music is outreach. That's the first thing to know. What we do is outreach. So I guess I've been doing the Wisconsin idea since around 1989 when I began playing professionally, except that it was the New York idea at the time because I was living in New York City. But what we do as musicians is take our love of music, our abilities of music, our understanding, our emotional attachment to music, and bring it to the public. We perform for audiences. It's total natural for us to think of outreach because that's our job. When I got here and the director of the School of Music told me, you'll be hearing a lot about the Wisconsin idea, and here's what it is. My reaction was, yeah, what's the big deal there? I mean, that's what we do. And he said, yeah, that's what we do. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. Not to make it all about me, it's supposed to be about the Wisconsin idea, but I guess in order to tell you how I engage with this, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I went to graduate school in New York City and finished in 1989, and that's pretty much when my career began as a professional horn player. And I have performed a whole lot. I'll tell you more about that. I've taught a whole lot. I'll tell you more about that. I've recorded a whole lot. I'll tell you more about that. So as a performer, the landscape of freelance performing has changed quite a bit in New York City as the economics of classical music change. And I guess by change, I in large measure mean as they get worse. There seems to be less and less money devoted to classical music, which I think is a shame because classical music's amazing, and classical music is a living art. There is new music being written all the time. As in every era, some of it is really bad and some small part of it is really good. And in order to have a thriving music scene, a thriving new music scene, you need to have way more music written than is good. There's no way to only have good new music written. Music comes out of a cauldron of ideas. So if you look back to Beethoven's time, another composer that was active at the time was Karl Stamitz. Probably most of you have not heard of Stamitz. He wrote a lot of music. Some of it's okay. Some of it's still played. Not a whole lot, but some. And there were lots of Stamitzes at the time, people of that type. We think of that era as this incredibly magical era when Beethoven was alive and writing amazing music. That doesn't mean that everybody was writing amazing music at the time. It means that Beethoven was, and he came out of the cauldron of composers and performers and styles that was existing at the time. So New York City is such a cauldron. Unfortunately, there's always the economic side of this, but my point about this is that in my opinion, and I'm completely biased, a thriving music scene is a signal of the health of a society. I would even say a thriving arts scene is a sign of the health of a society. A dying arts scene is the opposite. There is still a great deal of music happening in New York City. It's changing. The notion that the great music is symphonic music with 80 players on a stage becomes harder and harder to sustain. But what comes up in the meantime is small groups of musicians, maybe playing in different kinds of venues, playing their music in clubs that traditionally would have had jazz or rock, and now there is a string quartet playing there, or a brass quintet. In 1989, I joined a very young brass quintet called the Meridian Arts Ensemble, and shortly thereafter we won a competition in New York, and it launched our career. And as we developed as musicians, we began to see that we wanted to play music not just from the classical world, but the music that made up our recreational listening. We wanted to bring into our performance, and a lot of that was the kind of music that one plays in a club rather than in a concert hall. And our guiding philosophy became, let's take the music that we play in clubs and play it in the concert hall. Let's take the music that we play in a concert hall and play it in clubs. And we did quite a bit of that. And that is a kind of a version of the Wisconsin idea, actually, where you take something that normally exists in one place and you move it to another place. For me as an artist, incredible satisfaction in doing that. I have to say, the first time I played in a rock club, my group split the bill with the Cosmic Giggle Factory, a power trio in Arkansas. It was 25-cent pitcher night at the bar, and the audience was extremely dubious until we started playing some of our stuff, and a large crowd of drunken college students turns out to be a fantastic audience once they're behind you. And so that's quite a satisfying project. So one of the strands of my career in New York was playing with Meridian Arts Ensemble. We ended up as a sextet. We still exist. Brass quintet, which is 2 trumpets, horn, trombone, and tuba, plus a drummer, because a lot of the music we wanted to play could not be played without a drummer. It would not sound authentic. We made it our business to try to play authentically everything that we played, whether it was classical music, very modernist kinds of pieces, many of which we commissioned. We commissioned about 75 new pieces and premiered well over 100 new pieces. Latin music, music from all over the world. We would study the music that we were playing and try to give a performance that felt right and didn't sound like we were just intruding ourselves into the world of that music, but rather bringing the world of that music into our own artistry. In addition to performing with Meridian, I did a lot of gigs in New York, ranging from playing with Metropolitan Opera, the American Ballet Theater, lots of smaller orchestras, Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. If those of you who are familiar with the music scene will know some of these names, others won't. The Orchestra of St. Luke's, lots of chamber ensembles, lots of gigs of all kinds. My work with Meridian led to some teaching. First of all, I started teaching at Princeton University, teaching horn lessons to kids. Mostly, I only had one music major in my 14 years there. Mostly they were taking horn lessons for fun. They were extremely bright. They were very fun to teach. They didn't have a lot of time to practice, but they were enthusiastic about the instrument. And it was good that they didn't have a lot of time to practice, because I had no idea what I was doing as a teacher. It was my first experience teaching. So it was a great opportunity for me to learn the craft of teaching while my students worked on their horn playing in some small measure. That teaching job ended up leading to, my work with Meridian ended up leading to my first conservatory teaching job at the Hart School of Music, which is in Hartford, Connecticut. Even though I think the Hart in the Hart School is not related to the Hart in Hartford. It's just a happy coincidence. But there, for the first time, I was teaching students who were going to go on to become horn players. Luckily, I had a good deal of teaching experience already at that point. And teaching is, if you want to think of teaching as outreach, it's a way of bringing your knowledge to people who will then bring their knowledge to people who will then bring their knowledge to people. So it's kind of a fractal situation. If I'm teaching 10 students and each one of those teaches 10 students and each one of those teaches 10 students and so on, it's not long before I'm the great-great-great-grand teacher of 400 students. which is a really amazing thing. It's a heavy burden to think of, if I screw this student up, what's going to happen? On the other hand, if I can help this student, it's just an amazing thing to think that I am continuing the tradition of my teachers, who were fabulous teachers, and my teacher studied with his teacher, who studied with his teacher, who studied with his teacher, who discussed the Brahms horn trio with Brahms, most likely. So there is this tradition that goes out like a many-branched tree. And musicians who teach get the satisfaction of becoming a limb of that tree. Recording is another side of the career that I've had. Meridian recorded around, it's hard to count because we play a little bit on some CDs, but we have basically 12 of our own CDs with lots of repertoire that we created. I wrote a few pieces. We recorded 2 of my pieces with the group, and lots of commissioned pieces by other group members. So we're talking about a group that's trying to be as active as possible, not only in reproducing music of the past, but in trying to create the music that's going to continue to be played. And I like to think that we at least had some influence in the kind of music that brass quintets now play. I think a lot of the pieces that we commissioned have gotten some currency in the repertoire. And now that I'm here and play with the faculty brass quintet, which I'll get to in a minute, which is called the Wisconsin Brass Quintet, we've brought some of the music from Meridian into that group. So we're seeing an expanding sphere of influence. So life as a freelancer in New York City is all about saying yes when the phone rings, or nowadays when the text comes in, somebody says, can you do this? And if you're free, the answer is always yes, of course I can. If you don't know how to do it, you have between now and the start of the gig to figure out how to do it. And that's kind of the pleasure and the weirdness of life as a freelancer. I came here, as I mentioned, in the fall of 2011. I was spread very thinly. I was living in the kind of distant suburbs of New York City. I had 2 days a week teaching in Hartford. I was chairing the contemporary performance program at Manhattan School of Music. I was spending a lot of time on the train and in the car. I was performing in Broadway shows. I did a lot of Broadway work. I don't mention it first because Broadway work for musicians tends to start feeling repetitive and much more like a job. To the general public, it's the most impressive thing in one's bio. I played about 36 different titles of shows, probably somewhere around 5,000 shows. That may be an underestimate. I was under Broadway quite a bit of my career. In addition to that, driving to other gigs, traveling, commuting into the city, life was quite chaotic and unstable, and I had a young child. We decided that it was a good time to look for a more stable situation and to take everything that I did and put it together in one place. And this job was very attractive because it had this performing component, research component at a major research university, chance to teach really great students at a very high-powered school of music, chance to collaborate not with different people constantly, which can be fun, but with the same group of people and really build a home. Incidentally, the opportunity to build a happier life, which I think is good. We're not only our job, there's a lot more to life than that. And so that's what brought me here to UW-Madison. So here's basically, if you read my contract, what it tells me to do here. I teach, I perform, so I play with the Wisconsin Brass Quintet. Some of you may have heard the group. It's the Faculty Brass Quintet, and we play 2 recitals on campus per year, 1 each semester. And we also do a very traditional Wisconsin idea kind of a thing, which is to go out into the state and perform. And we do that in the form of recitals on concert series, but we also go out to schools and perform for school children. And I'll just add that playing for kids is something that musicians often talk about with some disrespect, but I think it is the most important thing that we do. Exposure to music is what builds musicians, future musicians. It's also what builds future music lovers, future concert goers. And as you may know, music programs in public schools have been cut a lot When I started in my own high school band program, there were 4 bands. When I got out, there were 2. And I think this is very typical. So going to play for kids, getting them excited about the instruments, about the music, about the art of learning an instrument, and what that gives to you in terms of exploring emotion, in terms of taking on a challenge, in terms of learning to do things through your own initiative, in terms of thinking of a project and carrying it through all the steps to its final execution, in terms of controlling these bodies of ours, which can be very hard to control. Our bodies are infinitely adaptable, and therefore it can be very difficult for us to do one thing with utter concentration. This is why we have yoga. This is why we have meditation. This is why we have martial arts, to be able to control our bodies. And music also does that. Is why our kids desperately need music. So I don't mean to be political about this, but rather to be musical about this and to be educational about this. Music is not an extra. The Greeks considered it one of the 4 major branches of learning and thinking, and I totally agree with that. Part of my job description is also to conduct research, and I put because we think of research as the kind of stuff that happens in this building and not so much as the kind of stuff that happens in the humanities building. So what is music research? Well, number 1, performing is considered research for a musician. Giving master classes, which means going to other universities and teaching their students. So that kind of research is outreach. It is outreach, which is great. I love the blending of outreach, teaching, research, service. When they all come together, to me, that's a sign of a career that's really popping. Recording is our research. Writing music, writing articles about music, writing reviews of our colleagues' CDs across the country. I publish a lot of CD reviews in the Horn Call. Probably your issue from the last issue probably came recently in your mailbox, because I'm sure you all read that. There is such a journal. So there are various aspects of research in the music teaching world, and those are things that I'll be talking a little bit more about. And then there's service to the university, the department, the community. Service can mean anything from sitting on committees all the way up to my Sound Waves series, which I will be telling you about. So, as I mentioned, I play with the Wisconsin Brass Quintet, and here we are in our most recent incarnation. And we typically play somewhere around 10 to 15 performances every academic year. Most of them are actually in Wisconsin. We've been to the far reaches of the state. We did a crazy thing last year and played in Ashland. We drove out, played, and drove back all in the same day, which I don't recommend, especially since we got lost on the way there. That made for a very long day. But we bring what we do to these audiences in Wisconsin. And the great thing about it is, if you are in a performing organization that, whether or not it is officially a not-for-profit organization, is nonetheless an organization that you are relying on to bring money into your bank account, you have to think about balancing the kinds of repertoire that you feel artistically need to be played with the kinds of repertoire that the audience feels that they need to listen to. And those don't always line up harmoniously, but when you play in a faculty brass quintet and you don't have to worry about money, you can say, we believe in this music, we believe this music needs to be heard, and you can bring that music out. Just like a chemist can take his or her research, which may not be understandable to the public, and publish it and attempt to explain it in some way that people can understand it, and this is still important research, even if it doesn't have a wide popular appeal. In my whole career, I've looked to balance these two ideas of popular appeal versus, let's call it, art music that has a smaller audience, and try to build audiences for very serious music. So this group is all about outreach and about teaching and about helping the kids of the state. And we also travel to neighboring states. We try to do one out-of-state tour every year. It brings us in contact with lots of other music teachers, with lots of children who play instruments, teenagers who don't seem like children to me anymore now that I have one, teenagers who are interested in music or who play instruments, and so forth. In addition to my duties on the faculty, when I got here, I had this idea for this sound wave series, which I'll be telling you about. And so the first question is, well, what is sound waves? It's a series, and each event has 4 lecturers from different departments, almost always, but not exclusive, not every single time, almost always from UW departments. And each one is talking about a particular theme, and I'm going to show you the themes in a minute. And from his or her own particular angle. The talks are like TED Talks, and probably most of you have seen TED Talks. They are completely understandable to the layman. And when I engage a faculty member to give one of these talks, I tell them you can use any kind of jargon that you need as long as you explain it. So our audience has heard explanations of DNA many, many times. And the rule is you can talk about DNA, but if you want to then talk about proteins, and you can't just say a protein is a collection of amino acids because we don't know what amino acids are either. So many of these things have been explained incredibly carefully by scientists to the sound waves audience so that they always follow the lectures, and there have been some very, very heavily scientific lectures, and I'm proud that almost nobody gets up and leaves because they're frustrated that they can't understand. And every Sound Waves event ends with a music performance. After the 4 lecturers speak, I speak about the theme as it relates to music, and then there's a related live performance. And we've had all kinds of live performances, many of them by the School of Music faculty, who are an incredible collection of performers, and we've also looked outside the faculty for some great players as well. One of the most notable being a Native American drumming circle from a little bit north of here, who came down and brought their drums and just knocked everybody's socks off with their performance. So the series started in 2012, but I had the idea even when I came here, and I started by thinking, wow, I'm going to be at this amazing university, and there are lots of smart people at this university, and I love that because I love talking to smart people because they know the answers to a lot of questions I have about the world. And so it's an opportunity to get into this new environment, meet people, hear what they have to say. And I have this, I've for a long time had this fantasy that I get transported back in time. And I'm now, I don't know, sometime in the year 73. And the people from the year 73 are asking me about what's life like 2,000 years from now. And I say, oh, well, it's pretty amazing. And they say, well, tell me about it. And I say, well, first of all, we can go all over the place because we have cars. And they say, what's a car? And I say, I don't know, it's a thing that's made out of metal that you get in. And they're like, wait, well, how could you get in, you know, metal, we get it out of rocks and we make little things. How could you get in something made out of metal? And I say, I don't know, they somehow do that. And then they say, well, what makes this thing go? And I said, gas. What's gas? I don't know. And well, how do you make it go over the landscape? Well, we build roads. Oh, how do you do that? I don't know. It's made of asphalt. What's asphalt? I don't know. And, you know, I don't understand anything about the world that I live in. I don't know how you get the material of the seats that you're sitting in, or how you make the plastic that's the back of those seats. I don't know how a clock works and stays on time. I don't know how this thing works, or how this is being recorded and stored. I know it's digital, but I know that's zeros and ones. But really, when you think about it, we know very little about how the world works. Whereas if you go back 5,000 years, people understood the stuff that they did. They didn't know how the planets move, or that there were planets, probably, but the stuff that they did, they got. Now I put my bread in the toaster, and it comes out toast, and I know it's hot in there, and it probably has something to do with electrical resistance, but basically I'm in the dark with almost every object in our world. So I had always thought, well, if I end up at a university, this is going to be my chance to figure out how stuff works and what our world is made of. So the idea started, people like science, people like music. There's audiences for both of those things, so let's put them together on a program. And that was the germ of the idea that I brought to the director of the School of Music. And I said, hey, I have this idea. People like science, people like music. Let's double our audience and double their audience. Do it all together. And he thought that was great, and he sent me to the director at the time of the Arts Institute, which is now called the Division of the Arts. And I pitched the idea to her, and she said, that's a great idea. I'm going to put you in touch with the people at Discovery. And I said, what's that? And so I started learning about our Discovery building and about WID, the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery, and the way that the people at our university are attempting to disseminate the research that we do in a way that people can understand, to bring the people of Madison, the people of Wisconsin, into our world of science and bring our world of science out into their world. And I thought, well, let's add music to that. That's a kind of a no-brainer, and I want to be on board with that. This was my first education in the Wisconsin idea and what it's all about. So eventually I did meet up with somebody at WID who was in charge of programs at WID. And I knew that at that point I'd seen the building. It was very fancy. This was not something where I could just say, let's put science and music together. That would be cool. And I needed some sort of approach or angle or way of doing it. And so my solution to that, to not seeming like I was a chaotic moron, was to say, hey, let's come up with these themes and let's find ways to get scientists and musicians to approach them together. So thank you, Discovery. Laura Heisler, who's in charge of programs on the ground floor of Discovery. I pitched 3 ideas to her, and I was fully expecting her to say, please leave, I'm not interested, or maybe, hey, I guess we could try one of those in a couple of years if we have time. Instead, she said, we'll start with this one, then we'll do this one, and then we'll do this one. And that was the beginning of Sound Waves. It's been going ever since. So here are the themes year by year. I hate it when people read their PowerPoints to the audience. I don't want to read this to you, but here's what I've done. I've given you the year, and then I've given you the 4 themes with the dots next to them. And then for each year, I chose one to show the department, the representatives of the departments that spoke at that one. So for instance, in music to our ears, I had someone from physics, someone from communicative disorders, someone from neuroscience, and someone from psychology, and we performed the Brahms horn trio at that. Right, so that was the first one that we did, and it was basically, what is music? How do we hear it? How do we process it? That sort of thing. And then you can see my other topics for that year. The next year, at the end of the first year, I applied for a Kemper-Knapp charitable bequest grant that supported outreach, and especially when it combined disciplines. And this was one of these emails that comes and that everybody throws out. But I thought, oh my God, this is what I'm doing with Sound Waves. I got to apply for a grant. And I applied for the maximum grant they gave, because this is what musicians do. When we ask for money, we double everything that we ask for, because we never get more than half. So I said, hey, I'll do 8 programs, and I need all this money to do posters and get them put up and to really start popularizing this. And to my amazement, I got everything that I asked for, which never happens. And that was the first of 2 amazing times that that's happened to me here at UW. So as I say, I received this grant and presented an insane number 8 programs, really pretty much one a month. It was relentless. So beauty, color, groups, and metal, and newness, repetition, metal, and wood. So in newness, we were talking about what it meant for something to be new. So chemistry, you have new chemicals that come out of old chemicals that combine. Genetics, obviously, and people in this building must really understand that. Astronomy, how is a star born? Ecology, how does the earth renew itself? And then I played new music on the horn. The next year we had a little recalculation of scale to have a sane number of programs, and eras was a really fun one because that was pretty much the introduction of more humanities units speaking on sound waves, because I thought we got brilliant people in the humanities as well as in the sciences, and there's no reason to exclude them from the series. So we had history and history of science, and we started reaching into the medical school as well, and it was pretty amazing. This historian who I've had back is just incredible, and I'm tempted now to try to think of themes for Sound Waves events where she can speak, because their speaking is so brilliant. So in 15-16, we did the number 3, which was a little bit of a Sesame Street, like this program is brought to you by the number 3. But it occurred to me in music, many things happen in groups of 3. So I was wondering, do other things happen in groups of 3 as well? So chemistry, botany was really cool, because in the botany lecture, the botanist was interested because leaves often grow in groups of 3 around a stem. And the question is, how do they know how to do it? And there's this twisting action that's programmed into the genetics of the stalk as it grows. So essentially, the leaf comes in always here, and the stalk twists. It's almost like how Hawaii is formed, where the hot spot stays and the land moves. In this case, the spot where the leaf propagates is the same, and the stalk is twisting. And if there's a botanist in the audience, I'm sure I'm not totally correct on that, but... And then there's a local jewelry artist who works with groups of 3 in his jewelry, so that was really fun. And we started getting into the idea. The botanist brought these wood samples and plant samples. Jewelry artists brought samples as well, so we had almost a little museum exhibit set up as part of the Sound Waves event. And then we had a Baroque quartet, and I enjoyed the sort of punny nature of that. The reason why it was a quartet is that I wanted trio sonatas, and trio sonatas are a kind of Baroque style of music, and there's 2 solo instruments and what's called a continuo part, and the continuo part is sort of the accompaniment, and it is often played by a keyboard instrument and a bass instrument. So the trio sonata has 4 people in it, and that seemed like a very fun thing to add to the number 3 program. And then Love and Romance was a nice big stretch for us. It permitted us to have somebody who does creative writing in the English department join us as well and read a short story. And the reason we did the 1920s is that Wid was looking back to the 20s when WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, was being set up. And so we thought, well, let's look and see what else was happening in the 1920s besides this amazing endowment for research being set up. Now, the year before last, I had a crazy year because I was coming up for tenure, so I scaled it back a little bit to only 3 programs. As you may know, getting tenure is a landmark event in the life of a professor, because if you do not get tenure, you say goodbye to everything and you leave. So that's a very time-consuming thing. So we did these 3 programs, and Vision was fun again because we could get into the medical school and the WID Living Environments lab, which is an amazing lab. If you haven't spent time at WID, I highly recommend doing as many things as you can there. It's just incredible. And then also having a recital with Christopher Taylor, Kit Taylor, who's one of the superstars of our department, just absolutely incredible piano player. So then last year, I had a different idea, which was, in addition to the themes for each of the 4 events, to have a meta theme that would unite the 4 events. And so my idea for last year was to take the meta theme of direction, and here you go with the 4 events that we had: up, down, left, and right. And so for down, for instance, we had a mathematician, a psychologist, and somebody. This was just incredible to me. The psychologist that was going to speak had a family event 2 days before the Sound Waves event that was some sort of emergency, and he couldn't do it. And he found a colleague at Whitewater who could talk on the same subject that he was going to talk. And so this professor from Whitewater got the whole thing ready in 2 days and then completely knocked our socks off. And then civil and environmental engineering was a great talk on how water moves around in Madison. So you turn on your faucet and water comes out. You probably never even thought that that is incredible. But it is. So he gave a talk on the whole mapping system and how things move from here to there. There's a whole life under our city, of which we are blissfully, in many cases, unaware. And then, of course, for down, we had to have a tuba recital, and our tuba professor on the faculty is just an incredible genius, so that was great. So this year, we're still kind of putting it together, but the theme is Hidden Worlds, and that's really starting to get into what is a road, what is a carpet made of, what's a synthetic, what are all these things that we take for granted in our lives. We wear glasses, how do they work? All that kind of stuff. So we're pulling together our Hidden Worlds themes, and Soundwaves is going to be starting up pretty soon. So I wrote this little statement about what the bigger idea of Soundwaves is, and I think this kind of captures what we're doing, and I'll just let you read it. That's my goal with the series. This goes across a bunch of different slides. This is the departments that we've had present at Soundwaves. By the way, when I got to UW-Madison, I had no idea what a lot of these things, like biostatistics and medical informatics, meant nothing to me. So it's been an incredible process getting to know faculty from these departments. Sociology. I'll also mention that, because I was seeing plant pathology, after my first year teaching here, every year there's a trip called the Wisconsin Idea Bus Tour. I think it's changed its name now, but it's a trip for about 40 members of the faculty and staff, usually new members, going around the state and just learning about the state. So you go to a farm that grows cabbage, and then you go to a plant that makes sauerkraut, and then you go to a place that makes cheese, and then you go to another UW campus that's very different, and you just see what's going on in the state. And some of the people who presented in the first year of Soundwaves and who've continued to present are people that I met on that trip, and just sitting around on long bus trips and talking about, hey, what do you do? What's cool about it? Oh, maybe you will, call them up later. Would you talk about that on my series? So it's largely about connections. So I was calling this talk Music Outreach, Music Inreach, and this is my idea of what, even though it's a horrible word and a terrible title, what Inreach is looking within the university to find ways to collaborate that you wouldn't imagine were ways to collaborate. So I say there's more where those came from, because Soundwaves is a going concern. We're always looking to expand the departments that we collaborate with and bringing more of these brilliant speakers to the attention of the public in Madison and beyond, because every lecture is videoed and posted on the Discovery website. So some people ask, where do the themes come from? And I put a question mark because typically what happens is I have lunch with Laura Heisler from Discovery, and we say, what are we going to do this year? And then we just start popping ideas, and it happens. Don't know how. Just comes to us. Future Soundwaves ideas. Don't know what's going to happen. It may be that we continue with these broad year-long themes. It may be that we change it up. Maybe, I can think of some weird topics that would be really fun to explore, like chairs. We could have we could have an athletic trainer talking about how terrible sitting is, We could talk about somebody talking about manufacture of artisanal things, somebody talking about colonial craftsmanship, and so on. You can see how once you think of the theme, no matter how dumb, the ideas start coming. Oh, there's people here who could talk about this and talk about that and talk about the other. All of a sudden, you've got a sound waves event, and you take a string quartet, they're all sitting down, and you have them perform in chairs, and boom, you got music, science, history, somebody talking about the play The 12 Chairs, Soviet play, and then suddenly you have fascinating people reaching out to the people of our community. I have to remember that one, chairs. So, talking about some of the other things that I do, and I'm probably a little bit up against the clock here, but another project of mine is called EARS, and that stands for the Electroacoustic Research Space. A fortunate acronym, not so fortunate since we planned it that way, but what is electroacoustic research? Okay, what is electroacoustic music is the real question. Electronic music, you can imagine what that is. Music played on synthesizers, played on computers, and so on. Electroacoustic music is music that results from the mixing of an acoustic instrument with electricity. So the most basic example of electroacoustic music would be an electric guitar. An electric guitar has an actual guitar with actual strings that vibrate, but then picked up by pickups, which are like little microphones or vibration pickups, and then amplified by means of electricity and played out through speakers. And now in our modern world, we have many, many electronic ways of manipulating music. And so I had gotten interested when I got to UW in exploring electroacoustic music largely for two reasons. One is there was a piece of software called Ableton Live that was taught in the program I was running at Manhattan School of Music to all the students in that program. And it seemed like a really cool program which you could do a lot of stuff with, and I wanted to learn how to do that. But also, because in Meridian, we had been playing throughout our history together a fair amount of rock and roll, and the horn had always been kind of a difficult fit with rock and roll, because lots of rock and roll music is about smearing, bending, putting a little bit of attitude into the sound, and the horn is, you play the horn and you think John Williams, Star Wars, and so making the horn work in the context of rock and roll had always been difficult for me, but I thought, well, if I can process the horn sound, I can be an electric guitar player on my instrument, and that would be really fun. So I actually released a CD of music that I wrote for basically electronic horn. My instrument played almost all of the voices, and then I brought in a drummer and a bass player, and I did all of that with my initial research funding. But I got an email, again, one of these summer emails that most people discard, that WARF was announcing that they were giving out these UW 2020 grants for large equipment purchases. This was the second round. The first round of this had been for science purchases exclusively, and the idea was that the chemists need an electron microscope, and the biochemists also need an electron microscope. And WARF wants to provide the funding. They're very expensive, so they will have a grant where they will encourage chemistry and biochemistry to collaborate and buy one electron microscope instead of two. So they were putting large amounts of money on the table for these kinds of collaborations for large equipment. The equipment I wanted to, and in the second year, this round two of the grant was opened up to the humanities, thanks to our Vice Chancellor of Research in the Humanities, who realized that people in the humanities need equipment often, and they don't have these grand opportunities to acquire equipment through funding from WARF. And even though my equipment was not large, when you put it all together, it created kind of an organism, a lab, a studio, that was like a piece of large equipment collectively. So I applied for this grant in that year, and I ended up being the first humanities recipient of that largesse. And that was the second occasion where I was granted all of the money that I asked for, which meant that I could create this incredible space. So here's Ears today, and that actually is today. I took the picture before I came here and popped it into the presentation. So you see my horn on the chair in the front, and then you can see over here in the back with the knobs is a Moog synthesizer. Robert Moog invented this kind of synthesizer that initially just had dials and buttons and chords where you could connect things. He's now dead, but the company is still making synthesizers. They now have keyboards as well, and they make amazing sounds. And Moog really figured out how you can use oscillators, which create sound waves, in particular using 3 oscillators to create different kinds of waves and to be able to create brand new sounds, some of which sound like instruments that we have, and some of which sound completely different. And it expands the palette of sounds that can be made. So in front of that is a keyboard which looks like it has some blue lights on it, probably because it does have some blue lights on it. And that's a MIDI keyboard. That's a keyboard which communicates with the computer, and the computer stores sounds, and they can be loaded into that keyboard, and then you can play and make it sound like a harp, and then you can make it sound like something else, and then you can make it sound like a snare drum, and so on. And then the thing on the big heavy metal stand is a really amazing keyboard that instead of keys that you push has a foam pad, so you can play it kind of like this, like a piano, but you can also smear and slide on it. It's called the Continuum because it provides continuous sounds up and down the keyboard. And then the funny thing that looks like a flat basketball is you can program drum sounds into each little sector of that. So you can have, if you're a keyboard player, you can easily play the keyboards in the back. If you're a percussionist, it may be easier to interface with that drum. We also have an electronic instrument that's set up like a vibraphone. And then there's all kinds of equipment for patching microphones in and so forth. So this is just one corner, although it is really the business corner of the lab. And you can see what a slob I am with all this stuff strewn on the floor as well. But a messy space, I like to think, indicates that there's interesting ideas happening. So Ears is definitely going strong now. Here's what we've done in Ears. So it was really, it is, as the title says, it's a research space. So primarily it is a research space for me and my colleagues to investigate new music in the electroacoustic realm. But I also do have open houses where the general public is invited. If you are going to come to one of those, I just had one as part of the Science Festival. They're fairly chaotic because there's a lot of kids pounding on a lot of things, but they're a chance to get your hands on these instruments. I also have a student improvisation ensemble called $2 Broom, and if anybody knows where that name comes from, you'll be only the second person to know that. And then I have taught an independent study composition course in the lab, and then we provided equipment for the orchestra and for the wind ensemble and for various performers who need to either plug in, amplify, run pre-recorded stuff. We had a visiting, actually, horn player as part of our Brass Fest who played a piece in which different sounds need to be triggered at different times in the piece through some computer software, and we were able to use Ears equipment for that. So it's starting to have an impact in different areas. I also have brought my equipment over to Discovery one time with $2 Broom a couple years ago, or last year, I guess, to do a performance. At last year's Science Festival, I had, in addition to an open house at the Ears Lab, I had one in the Discovery building as well, which drove people completely nuts, so we decided not to do that anymore. So it's getting a lot of use. It's also this idea of Inreach, bringing people who don't normally come to the School of Music into the School of Music, which I think is extremely important, that we show what's going on in our space to the public. So just in case you're wondering, Ears is not a recording studio. It is far from soundproof and has vents which make noise, nor is it a place where somebody can walk in and say, could I borrow that $4,000 microphone, please? Nor is it open to the public all the time. But if any of you wants a tour, please email me. I'd be happy to take people through. Ears is on the tour group for students visiting the School of Music, prospective students. So pretty much every student who's interested in applying to the School of Music gets taken through the room, and if I'm there, I do some demonstrations for them. And I am more than happy to show any student or member of the general public the space and let you try some of the instruments. There are many students who come at this world of electroacoustic music through their interest in hip-hop and in DJing. A lot of the equipment that we use was developed through those worlds. Those are part of the music world where money is made instead of money being lost, and therefore they get the cool toys. And so what we do when we have a funder like with the generosity of Wharf is we buy their cool toys and we use them for our own purposes. So just in terms of, these things are just in terms of the outreach that we do, which I already mentioned. And then here's in terms of the Inreach that we do. We typically in the School of Music mostly are dealing with our music majors, performance and music education, but bringing students who maybe know a lot about Ableton Live, the software, because they have night gigs as a DJ, but don't know anything about classical music or modern music or a lot of the equipment that we have, but they're completely fired up, and as an added benefit, they can help tutor the music students who don't know anything about the software, so everybody's learning from everybody. And in fact, this semester in $2 Broom, we have just such a student who's a business major, and we also have a student who's studying art and does art installations, is very interested in learning how to create the music for her art installations. So I've also been able to hook up with some professors, especially through engineering, who build instruments and pieces of equipment like the ones that I have in Ears. And so for me, that's just incredible because they have this knowledge of how things work, that as you're getting the idea that I'm very interested in how things work. And then hosting all manner of visitors who come by. So I'm kind of concluding with these general questions about, is the university important to the public? Which obviously I think that it is. But it's incumbent on those of us who work within the university to make it important to the public. So that means we have to learn how to talk about what we do in general terms that people can understand and not think that there's anything bad about that, but that in fact it's very good to be able to do that, to speak without relying on terms that are incomprehensible to most people and in plain English. We also can use the breadth of the university to round out the knowledge that our students have, because I don't know about you guys, but every time I'm driving in the science end of the campus, I notice another department of something I've never heard of that's got a whole building and a whole department, and it just blows my mind what people know around here. So, you know, as much as it's great to bring those people into music, it's great to take music students and bring them out to those departments, or at least get them exposed to what's happening in those departments, and to take the general public and expose them to all kinds of people they might otherwise not be exposed to. That's the end of the slideshow. Thank you very much. I would be more than happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
Do you get involved with the WISO program here in Madison?
So the question, do I get involved with the WISO program, which is the Wisconsin Youth Symphony? Right. So my son actually used to play in WISO. But the School of Music faculty is involved with WISO in various ways. Typically, we work with the section of our instrument, so I've worked with WISO horn sections. And it's not just WISO either. We have the Winds of Wisconsin, which is an honor band for high school students. There's a lot of, and then we have just high school students in the state who come to see us. So we're deeply involved with young musicians in Madison and outside of Madison. Any other questions? I know I talked and talked and talked, so you may not have any questions. Yes, in the back.
Was agriculture one of the disciplines? And if not, do you have ideas to work with agriculture?
Agriculture was not one of the disciplines that we've had yet, but I would absolutely love to do that. I mean, something about geography can always include agriculture. One thing that I've learned doing sound waves is that everything relates to everything, which is why it's so easy to choose themes and find people who could speak about the theme, because our world is just incredibly interstitched. And so agriculture would be an easy fit with a sound waves theme. Certainly with hidden worlds. For instance, I would wonder, we just take for granted that we grow stuff, but once upon a time we didn't know how to grow stuff. How did that happen? I mean, I can sort of guess, but there's people here who know. Anybody else? What do I do if it's 2 of 7 and... Oh, we have a question. Good.
So how big of a transition was it going from a gig guy, a freelance guy in, Music City, New York, to being like Mr. Academic? Was that kind of...
Well, it was in some way... the bigger transition was from New York City to Madison and a different kind of life. Teaching horn players is something I've been doing since I was 23 years old. And that's what I do here. And my teaching evolves from week to week. It always has. It always, I hope, will. So there's nothing really new there. Doing a little conducting, leading the brass choir, or the horn choir rather. There's nothing foreign about that. There's nothing foreign about working with horn sections. I grew up in a college town. My dad has been a professor his whole life, still is teaching in his 80s. So the academic environment is a place of great comfort to me. Of course, getting used to a new set of colleagues is always something that has to happen when you change locations. But I felt that it was more of an opportunity than a difficult transition. The winter, though, is cold here. You may have noticed.
For everybody.
Yes, it is. Anybody else? Well, yeah, is that it? Thank you so much for your attention. Appreciate it. Okay.
How appreciative are the citizens when you go do these things? Are they? I would imagine they're very happy.
Yeah. Well, I think it was last year. I didn't announce the date of the next sound waves at the previous sound waves, and I got yelled at. Somebody said, I plan my whole semester around sound waves, so I really need to know when they are. So please tell us. So there's usually about 150 people in attendance, with many, many, many regulars who come back to everyone or almost everyone.
So when is the next one?
To be announced. We're trying to figure that out. But
how do you find out about it?
They're listed on Discovery's website. And then we also have a mailing list. So once you come to one, you can leave your email address and be notified.
Do you ever get any rest at all?
I try to get rest.
You sound so busy. This has been fabulous.
Oh, we have another question here.
Oh, sorry.
You said we could email you to get a tour.
Mm-hmm.
Email address.
My email address, you can, if you aren't able to write this down right now, you can always find me on the School of Music website. I'm the only horn professor. But it's D, as in dog, Grabois at wisc.edu.
Thank you.
Just remind me that you were here at the talk and you'd love a tour of yours, and I will provide it.
There are attendance sheets. If you want to sign those, they don't have a clipboard this week because I forgot them, but they're in each corner. So if you're taking it for credit or something, please. It was a remarkable talk.
Oh, thank you.
The thing that most impressed me was the idea of these things where you have all these people from these different disciplines, and then there's this music with it. Do you try to express? Does the music follow the talks?
Yes, it's last.
And you try to express and somehow synthesize what they've said musically?
Well, for instance, when we did metal, the theme of metal, we had a brass quintet perform.
Right.
So it's not always that somebody's research on cell biology is then going to be reflected in the performance, but at least there is some sort of connection. But I think part of what's nice about it is that it's nice to end with a performance. People like hearing music. Yes, sir?
You do host the planet with the astronomy department?
I would love to do that. That requires a whole orchestra and weeks of rehearsal. And so, yeah, I mean, I think big like you are, and then I have to try to think about how you can make it smaller. Yeah, well, and space.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you.